Your council tax goes out every month. You didn't vote on the amount, you can't cancel it, you can't switch providers, you can't opt out. It just leaves your account, same day, every month. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you trust that it goes somewhere real. Roads, bins, libraries, the children's center down the road, the social worker who checks on the elderly woman 3 streets over. That is the deal. You pay, they provide. But in Croydon, between 2015 and 2020, the people running the council decided to do something a little different with it. They set up a property company, called it Brick by Brick. They lent it £200 million of public money, your money, and then handed it 24 parcels of public land, your land. 6 of those sites went for £1 each. A public green space in Upper Norwood changed hands for £250. That is not a typo. They told residents this was the plan, their solution to the housing crisis, their gift to the community. In 11 years, that company built 3 council homes. 3, not 300, not 3,000. 3, 1, 2, 3, on land that already belonged to you. The company wound up in April of 2026. It never made a penny of profit. It never repaid a single penny to the council during its entire operating life. The final write-off when it closed, £68 million. Gone. The chief executive who designed the whole thing, who ignored 5 consecutive warnings from auditors, who gave herself a pay rise in the year the council went bust, left in 2020 with £613,895. That figure made her the highest paid council executive exit in England that year. Nobody has been charged with anything. Your council tax is still going out every single month. If what you're about to hear makes sense of something you've felt in your gut for years, a quiet suspicion that the money doesn't go where they say it does, that the people making the decisions never pay the price, then subscribe. Because the people in this story were counting on you never finding out. That is precisely why they buried it all in board minutes that were never published, in meetings that were never recorded, and in documents that someone spent years trying to suppress. To understand how Croydon ended up where it did, you first need to understand what was happening across the whole country. Because Croydon didn't invent this, it was handed a template. From 2010 onwards, central government cut council funding year after year. In real terms, councils across England lost roughly 40% of their central government income over a decade. Nearly half their money gone. So the government offered a workaround. There was a body called the Public Works Loan Board, run by the government itself, that offered cheap borrowing to councils. The message was simple. Stop depending on us. Borrow cheap, invest commercially, generate your own income. By the end of 2016, roughly 150 councils had set up their own housing companies or were in the process of doing so. Croydon wasn't rogue. Croydon was doing exactly what it was told. The difference between Croydon and everywhere else is a local journalist called Stephen Downs, who runs a site called Inside Croydon. He spent years filing Freedom of Information requests and publishing what he found. The council eventually tried to take him to court, using your money to stop him. They lost. And because he kept going, we know what the rest of England's councils are hoping nobody ever looks at too closely. So, Croydon Council, 2015. Labour in charge, led by a man called Tony Newman, who would go on to lead the council for 15 years. There is a housing crisis. Same as most of London, same as everywhere else. The plan is to set up a council-owned developer. On paper, the theory is clean enough. The council lends money to the company builds on publicly owned land, sells some homes at market rate, and uses the profit to cross-subsidize affordable and social rent properties. Then it pays the money back. The chief executive was Jo Negrini. By her final year, she was earning £218,000, including pension. She was the driving force behind Brick by Brick, and she appointed a former council employee called Colm Lacey to run it. Lacey had spent his entire career in local government administration. Not property development, not construction, not finance. Local government. He had never run a development company in his life. His salary running this publicly funded operation, your money, is believed to have been well over £150,000 a year. for a job he had no track record of doing. Between 2015 and 2020, the council lent brick by brick £200 million. On top of that, they handed over the land, 24 parcels in total, 6 sites for £1 each, a green space for £250. Private Eye would later describe these as sales at mates rates, which, honestly, is putting it generously. And what did Brick by Brick actually do with all of it? The flats it built, on land it bought from the council for £1. It's sold on the open market. One-bedroom flats at £395,000. Two-bedroom flats at close to £500,000. On land that had been publicly owned. On land your council tax had paid for over decades. And the affordable homes, the social rent properties, the entire reason the company was supposed to exist? Three one-bedroom council homes in 11 years. The company also planned shared ownership properties as its contribution to affordable housing. Shared ownership, which, if you've seen our earlier videos, you'll already know is a system with its own serious problems. But here's the thing. Nobody at Brick by Brick had actually registered the company as a recognized provider of shared ownership homes, which meant no mortgage lender could legally touch their properties. Dozens of people who thought they were buying a home found out they couldn't get a mortgage on it because of an administrative oversight that should have been caught on day one. The entire shared ownership program collapsed because someone forgot to fill in the paperwork. If you made a typo on your planning permission form for a garden extension, they would come and make you knock it down. Brick by Brick forgot to register as a housing provider entirely. Nothing happened. When PricewaterhouseCoopers were brought in to look at the books, what they found was extraordinary. The company had no finance director. Loan agreements were in breach of their own conditions. There were loans where the repayment date had already passed, meaning Brick by Brick was technically in default, while at the same time asking the council for more money. $214 million borrowed, in default, never a penny of profit, never a penny repaid, and still they were coming back for top-ups. The auditors Grant Thornton had been warning the council since 2017. 5 separate official warnings over 3 years. In 2018, they wrote it plainly. Your reserves are at a very low position and you're facing clear risk to your continued financial health. In April 2020, Grant Thornton wrote directly to Negrini herself, telling her that action was vital. She didn't respond. Instead, she handed in her notice. The Appointments Committee, led by Tony Newman and his labor colleagues, voted through a severance package of £613,895. Paid for by council tax, paid for by you. The highest exit payment to a council executive in England that year. 2 conservatives on the committee are believed to have voted against. They were outvoted. Negrini left. And Croydon was heading for bankruptcy. But before we go any further, there is a married couple you need to know about, because this is where the story shifts from incompetence into something that looks a great deal more deliberate. The cabinet member responsible for housing, the person whose job it was to oversee Brick by Brick, was a labor councillor called Alison Butler. Deputy leader of the council, the chair of the planning committee, the person whose job it was to approve or reject every single planning application in the borough, including every application from Brick by Brick, was a labor councillor called Paul Scott. Butler and Scott were married to each other. Scott also worked in his day job as a director at an architect's firm that was active in the London building trade. And rather than stepping back from the planning chair given these obvious conflicts, he was given a special dispensation, approved at a council meeting whose minutes were never made public, meaning he never had to declare a conflict of interest at any planning meeting for 6 years, while overseeing applications from a company being run by his wife on land sold by a council his wife helped lead. In those 6 years, Brick by Brick submitted planning applications for over 40 sites, covering more than 1,000 homes. Every single one was approved, not one refused. Planning committee members later told Inside Croydon that Scott had made clear to labor members that if one Brick by Brick application failed, they would all fail. The local government association has said that using party pressure to direct planning decisions is likely to constitute maladministration. The council's own chief executive was formally asked by a Conservative MP to investigate. She refused. Meanwhile, Colum Lacey had registered his own private consultancy company while still employed by Brick, while still drawing a publicly funded salary. Board members said nobody was asked. When the council went bankrupt, he refused to resign. He served out 3 months' notice collecting his salary and then left. To this day, he publicly describes himself as the founder of Brick by Brick, the company that built 3 homes with £200 million. No charges, no censure, just the LinkedIn profile. Then there is Fairfield Halls. Fairfield Halls is Croydon's main arts venue, a building where the Beatles performed, where Queen played, a piece of genuine cultural heritage at the center of the borough. In 2016, it needed refurbishment. The budget agreed by the cabinet was £30 million, a 2-year project. The contract went to Brick by Brick, a housing developer, with no experience of heritage arts venues, no track record of completing any project, and no competitive tender. Grant Thornton, in their public interest report, confirmed that the council holds no record of any tendering process. Their conclusion was explicit. The license was, at least in part, intended to circumvent procurement law and competitive tendering. That is the council's own auditors saying on the public record that the structure was chosen specifically to get around the legal requirement for a fair tender. The refurbishment took 3 years, not 2, and it cost £73 million, £43 million over budget. The venue was handed back to operators in an unfinished state. The council paid £1 million in compensation for an incomplete building. The building still leaks. And here is the detail that the December 2024 Kroll report, a £310,000 independent investigation, put into writing. Joe Negrini refused to be interviewed. All of Colum Lacey's emails had been wiped. The 4 cabinet members at the center of this, Newman, Scott, Butler, and the finance lead Simon Hall, were never spoken to in person as part of the investigation. A £310,000 inquiry that could not reach its own subjects because they simply declined to engage. Negrini had known about the Fairfield cost overruns since 2018. She never told the cabinet. No charges, no consequences. The building still leaks. On the 11th of November 2020, Croydon declared itself effectively bankrupt. In the previous 30 years, that had happened to councils across the whole of Britain just 3 times. Croydon would do it 3 times in 2 years. No council in British history has ever managed that. The total debt? £1.6 billion, and here is what that means in practice. Right now, in 2026, the council's own mayor confirmed in his February 2026 budget letter that debt costs alone will total £86 million this year. £86 million before a single road is repaired, before a single social worker is paid, before a single bin is collected. That is the permanent annual cost of decisions made between 2015 and 2020 by people who took their severance packages and walked away. To close that gap, council tax has risen by 27% since the current mayor took office. Band D households in Croydon are now paying close to £2,500 a year. 4 libraries closed in 2024. The 3rd floor of the Central Library shut permanently in May 2025. Youth outreach services were cut. School safety patrols were cut. 500 jobs went in the first round of redundancies, with 360 more announced in 2025. And then there is the fly tipping. According to DEFRA's official figures, Croydon recorded 53,268 fly tips in 2024 to 2025, more than 1,000 a week. The worst record in the entire country. The borough that borrowed £1.5 billion to invest in property could not afford to maintain an enforcement team. From 2023 until early 2026, there were no fly tip enforcement officers in Croydon at all. None. Criminal fly tippers could dump illegal waste across the borough with virtually no prospect of prosecution. Private Eye named Croydon a rotten borough for the 8th time in 9 years in January of 2026. Now let's talk about what happened to the people who caused this. Tony Newman led the council for 15 years. When the bankruptcy hit and journalists asked him to account for himself, his joint statement read, "Things can go wrong without there being any wrongdoing. Our decisions were taken in good faith." He was suspended by the Labour Party in 2021. In April 2025, Labor lifted the suspension. He is back in. Joe Negrini left with £613,000, refused to be interviewed by the inquiry, and has faced no legal consequences. Colin Lacey left after serving out his notice, is now Group Director of Capital Projects at a further education college group, and still describes himself publicly as the founder of Brick by Brick. And then there is Richard Simpson. Richard Simpson was Croydon's finance director. He was the man who set up the funding model for Brick by Brick in the first place. The model that Croydon Council has since reported to his professional body, CIPFA, as potentially improper. He left Croydon quietly in December 2018 as concerns were starting to mount. 3 months later, he turned up at Sutton Council, right next door, as Strategic Director of Resources. He was made permanent in August 2019. As of April 2026, Richard Simpson is still there. His salary package, £205,398 a year. He remains under active investigation by CYPFA for his role in the Brick by Brick collapse. And he is currently overseeing a £100 million regeneration scheme in Sutton. The man whose financial structures helped bankrupt one borough is now in charge of a £100 million project in the borough next door. No charges. Still being paid. Investigation ongoing. The police investigated Croydon Council. They went through 2,609 pages of documents. In December 2024, they dropped it all. The Crown Prosecution Service told them that negligence and incompetence are not, by themselves, sufficient to amount to misconduct in public office. In other words, they were not corrupt. They were just incompetent. And in English law, being catastrophically incompetent with other people's money at enormous scale, with devastating consequences for hundreds of thousands of residents, is not a crime. But here's the part that explains why this keeps happening in Croydon and everywhere else. The power to fine councillors personally for reckless financial decisions was abolished in the Local Government Act 2000. The independent audit body that would have caught this far earlier was abolished in 2010 as part of austerity cuts, by the same government that was simultaneously telling councils to borrow and invest commercially. The public inquiry that might have led to real accountability was blocked because a proper inquiry would have had to examine the fact that Westminster itself gave the instruction to do exactly this. So the law was removed, the oversight was abolished, the inquiry was blocked, the emails were wiped, the interviews were declined, and the bill lands where it always lands. Here's what you can actually do with this. Go to whatdotheyknow.com. Anyone in Britain can file a Freedom of Information request to any public body. The site logs every request and every response publicly, so the information benefits everyone, not just the person who asked. Look at your own council. Look at the companies they own. Look at the land they have sold and what they sold it for. Write to your MP, use the word surcharging specifically. Tell them you know it was abolished in 2000 and that Croydon's own chief executive confirmed on the record in 2023 that nothing of equivalent weight now exists. That word matters. Politicians respond to specific knowledge. And support Inside Croydon. Stephen Downes is the reason any of this is public. The council spent your money trying to silence him. He is still publishing. Local journalism is the only reason these stories ever get out, and it survives only if people choose to support it. Yvonne Green was a union official who had worked alongside Tony Newman for years. She was labor to the core. When the bankruptcy hit, she stood at a public rally and said, "It is a disgrace that this council is in this position, and yet no one has been held accountable for bringing it to its knees. Why should we all have to pay the price?" There is no satisfying legal answer to that question. The law was removed, the oversight was abolished, the inquiry was blocked, and so the bill lands where it always lands, on the people who pay their council tax every month without being asked, without a choice, without an opt-out. The ones whose libraries closed, the ones whose children are growing up in a ward where nearly half of them live in poverty. Still waiting for the affordable homes the company was supposed to build. The company that had 11 years, £200 million, 24 parcels of public land, and built 3 homes. The debt is still there. £86 million in interest this year alone. It goes out before a single service is funded, before a single road is fixed, before a single bin is emptied. It goes out the same way your council tax does, same day, every month, without being asked. And if you're sitting there thinking Croydon is the exception, that this was one rogue council, one bad set of decisions, one place where it all went wrong, the video on your screen right now will change your mind. Click it.